He had forgotten what it was to love. After losing his wife and seeing his world crumble, Lucas closed himself off in an endless void. But that day, as the rain beat against the window and he stared at the portrait of his old life, an unexpected woman knocked on his door. And it was in that moment that he discovered that love, the one he thought he had lost forever, could still save him. Lucas sat in the silence of the living room, the ticking of the clock the only sound that filled the air. He stared at the photograph in his hands, his mind a blur of thoughts and memories. It was an image of a time when everything seemed perfect. Rachel, his wife, stood beside him, smiling as always, her eyes sparkling with warmth and love. Alice, their little girl, was perched on Lucas's lap, giggling as if she were the happiest child in the world. They looked so carefree, so happy, until the accident. The photo was now just a cold reminder of everything he had lost, everything that had slipped through his fingers in the blink of an eye. Lucas traced the edges of Rachel's face with his thumb, almost as if he could still feel her presence, still reach out to the love they had once shared. But it was gone. All of it. Gone forever. It had been 3 years since the accident, 3 long years that had felt like an eternity, each day dragging on endlessly, a painful reminder of how life could change in an instant. And in those 3 years, Lucas had tried his best to put his life back together, to continue on for Alice, to give her the kind of life Rachel would have wanted for her. But he felt like he was failing, every single day. He hadn't realized how much of himself he'd lost until it was too late. His smile had become forced, his laughter hollow. He went through the motions of life, work, errands, caring for Alice. But inside, he was numb. There was no joy, no fulfillment. He was simply existing. Alice, his sweet little girl, had been the only thing keeping him from completely losing himself. He saw so much of Rachel in her, and yet there were times when he was afraid of the memories she would bring up, times when he was afraid of loving her too much, because that love reminded him of what he had lost. He hated himself for feeling that way. He should be grateful. He should embrace every moment with Alice, but the pain in his chest was overwhelming, suffocating. His fingers tightened around the photo, and his eyes began to burn with unshed tears. How could he move on when part of him was gone? How could he possibly be the father Alice needed when he couldn't even be the man Rachel had once loved? For months, Lucas had tried to ignore the emptiness that gnawed at his soul. He buried himself in his work, in taking care of Alice, in trying to keep up appearances. He became a master at pretending to be okay, pretending to be strong. But when the house was quiet, when the world outside seemed to fade away, that's when the walls came crashing down. That's when the grief came rushing back, relentless and unforgiving. And he'd always find himself sitting there, in the silence, wishing for a life that no longer existed. It wasn't just the loss of Rachel that hurt. It was the realization that he would never again feel the kind of love he had once known, the kind of love that made everything feel possible. He missed the way Rachel's eyes would light up when she saw him after a long day. He missed the way she laughed, a sound that could fill their home with joy. But most of all, he missed the way she believed in him, believed in them. And now, all he had was the void. One night, after Alice had gone to bed, Lucas stood by the window, staring out into the darkness. The rain had begun to fall softly, tapping against the window pane. He watched the droplets slide down the glass, their paths following the same course as his thoughts, slow, endless, never-ending. He felt trapped, suffocated by his grief, like he was drowning in it. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't escape it. What happened to me, he thought, his chest tight with the weight of his emotions. What happened to the man I used to be? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. He turned, startled, and wiped his face quickly, not wanting anyone to see the rawness of his pain. But when the door opened, his heart skipped a beat. It was Alice. Her small figure stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Daddy?" she whispered, stepping inside. Lucas quickly wiped his eyes again and forced a smile. "Hey, sweetie, what's up?" Alice looked up at him, her expression serious. She wasn't just a child, not anymore. She had seen the sadness in his eyes. She had seen how his shoulders slumped under the weight of an invisible burden. "I can't sleep," Alice said softly, her small hands clutching her stuffed bear. She shuffled toward him and held up her arms. Without hesitation, Lucas scooped her up, his heart aching as he hugged her tightly. He always thought he was supposed to protect her. But now, she seemed to be the one offering him comfort. "Why can't you sleep, honey?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. He could feel her small heart beating against his chest. "I miss Mommy," Alice said simply. She rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. "I wish she could come back." The words hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't expected her to say that. He had tried so hard to shield her from the pain, to protect her from the truth. But how could he protect her from the one thing they both had lost? "I miss her too," Lucas said quietly, his voice breaking. He kissed the top of Alice's head, holding her closer. "But we still have each other, sweetheart. And I promise we'll be okay. We'll always have each other." As he whispered those words, he tried to believe them. He wanted to believe them. But how could he? How could he convince Alice that everything would be okay when he wasn't sure himself? He had no answers, no solutions. He only had the love he felt for her, and that, he hoped, would be enough. The days passed in a blur. Lucas did his best to go through the motions. He took Alice to school, made her breakfast, helped her with her homework. He smiled when he needed to, laughed when it was expected. But inside, the ache never went away. It never lessened. He had tried to push Rachel out of his thoughts, tried to move forward. But the memories of her were always there, lurking in the background, waiting to surface at the most unexpected moments. He'd hear a song that reminded him of their first dance, or catch a scent in the air that made him think of her perfume. And in those moments, it was as if everything had stopped. He would be transported back in time, back to when they were happy. But then the moment would pass and he would be left with the cold, harsh reality. One evening, Lucas sat in the kitchen, staring at a plate of food he had barely touched. The house was too quiet, too empty. He hadn't heard Alice's laughter in the other room for a while. She had been so quiet lately, so withdrawn. It worried him. He knew she was grieving too. But how could he help her when he didn't even know how to help himself? There was a knock on the door. It was a small, polite knock, the kind of knock that could belong to anyone. Lucas hesitated, unsure if he was ready for company. He wasn't sure if he was ready for anyone to see him like this, broken, defeated. But when he opened the door, he was surprised to find a woman standing there. She was standing on his doorstep holding a basket of food. She looked at him with kind eyes, her expression gentle but concerned. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Clara. I live down the street. I thought I'd bring over some food just in case you needed it. I know it's been tough." Lucas stared at her, unsure of what to say. He hadn't expected this. In fact, he wasn't sure what to expect from anyone anymore. But there was something about Clara's presence that felt calming, like a small ray of light piercing through the darkness. "Thank you," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. He stood aside and gestured for her to come in. Clara smiled warmly and stepped inside. It was the first time in months that Lucas had felt a hint of comfort from anyone. After what felt like an eternity of silence, Lucas opened the door to find a woman standing in front of him. She wasn't a stranger exactly. He had seen her around the neighborhood a few times, but they'd never spoken. She was tall, with a warm smile that seemed to shine even in the dim light of his front porch. In her arms she held a basket covered with a bright red cloth, the unmistakable scent of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. "Hi," she said softly, her voice gentle but confident. "I'm Clara. I live just down the street. I thought I'd bring over some food just in case you needed it." Lucas stared at her for a moment, his heart skipping a beat. He wasn't used to people offering help, especially not without some ulterior motive. His life had been marked by the solitude of grief, and the idea of accepting kindness felt foreign, almost like an intrusion. But Clara's presence was different. There was no pity in her eyes, just warmth, understanding, and a kindness that Lucas hadn't seen in a long time. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice a bit raspy from the emotion that had built up inside him. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Clara gave him a kind smile as she walked into the living room, setting the basket on the table. "I thought you might be busy or, overwhelmed," she said, glancing around the room. "It's hard to manage everything when life keeps throwing curveballs." Lucas wasn't sure how to respond. She was right, but how could she possibly understand what he had been going through? How could anyone? He had spent the past few years pretending to be fine, hiding the pain that consumed him from the world. And yet here was Clara, someone who seemed to sense his sorrow without even knowing the details of his life. "I'm not sure what to say," Lucas replied honestly, feeling vulnerable in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. I've been trying to manage, but it's been harder than I thought." Clara's eyes softened. "It's okay. You don't have to explain yourself. Sometimes it's just about getting through each day one step at a time." Lucas stood in the doorway, watching her as she began to unpack the basket. There was something about her presence, something calm and steady, that made him feel less alone, even for just a moment. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, he didn't have to carry the burden on his own. Clara placed a loaf of bread, some cheese, and a small jar of homemade jam on the counter. "I wasn't sure what you liked," she said, turning to face him. "But I thought you might appreciate something simple." He nodded, his throat tight. "I haven't had anything like this in a while. Thank you." Clara smiled, but there was a touch of sadness in her eyes. "I know it's hard," she said softly. "I've been through my own share of pain. I'm not here to fix anything, but I wanted you to know that it's okay to lean on others. You don't have to do it all alone." Her words hit Lucas harder than he expected. He hadn't realized how isolated he had allowed himself to become. After Rachel's death, he'd shut out everyone, friends, family, even his own emotions. He'd built walls around his heart, thinking that if he kept everyone at arm's length, he wouldn't have to feel the pain of losing them, too. But Clara's words, her simple act of kindness, began to tear down those walls, one brick at a time. "I don't know how to let people in anymore," Lucas admitted, his voice quiet. He hadn't meant to say it out loud, but the truth spilled from him without warning. Clara didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, her gaze filled with understanding. Then she took a step toward him, her voice steady but gentle. "It's not easy," she said, "especially when you've been hurt. But sometimes, letting someone in doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're strong enough to heal." Lucas looked at her, her words lingering in the air between them. He had spent so long convinced that his grief was something he had to bear alone, that the weight of his loss was something only he could carry. But here was Clara, someone who didn't know him, who had no reason to offer anything, and yet she was extending her hand to him without asking for anything in return. And for the first time in months, Lucas felt a flicker of hope, a small, fragile spark that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way out of the darkness. Clara and Lucas sat together at the kitchen table, the basket of food between them. Alice had long since gone to bed, and the house was quiet once more. But for the first time in a long while, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful, almost comforting. "So, what brought you here?" Lucas asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. It was rare for him to open up to anyone, especially someone like Clara, but something about her made him feel like he could trust her. Clara smiled gently, her eyes twinkling with a hint of vulnerability. "I guess you could say life has a way of leading you where you need to go," she said softly. "I'm a single mom. I've had my fair share of struggles, just like you. But when I saw you here all alone, I couldn't help but feel that maybe I could help in some small way." Lucas raised an eyebrow, surprised by her honesty. "I didn't know you had your own struggles." You seem so put together." Clara laughed softly, the sound warm and genuine. "I've had my moments of being anything but put together," she admitted. "But that's life, isn't it? We all go through tough times. We just have to keep moving forward even when it feels impossible." Her words resonated deeply with Lucas. He had spent so long feeling like he was the only one struggling, like his pain was something unique to him. But hearing Clara talk about her own experiences, about the challenges she had faced, made him realize that maybe he wasn't so alone after all. "I guess I've been living in my own little world," Lucas said, his voice softening. "I've been so focused on my own pain that I've forgotten what it's like to really connect with someone." Clara's smile softened, and she placed a hand on his arm, a simple gesture that made him feel strangely comforted. "It's not easy, Lucas, but sometimes the best way to heal is to let others in. You don't have to do everything on your own." The days that followed Clara's visit were a blur of emotions for Lucas. He found himself thinking about her words more and more, about how simple acts of kindness had the power to shift his entire perspective. He didn't know if he was ready to open up fully, to let someone into the depths of his grief, but for the first time in a long time he felt like it was possible, that maybe, just maybe, he could take that first step toward healing. Clara's presence in his life was a reminder that there was still good in the world, that there were still people willing to offer help without expecting anything in return. Her kindness was like a small light in the darkness, guiding him towards something he thought he had lost forever: hope. The days passed in a haze for Lucas. Each morning he woke up with the same knot in his chest, the same heaviness weighing down his heart. He still carried the grief of Rachel's loss like a weight on his shoulders. But now, with Clara's presence in his life, there was a flicker of light, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him start thinking that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to move forward. He had been trying to be the father Alice needed, trying to push past his pain, trying to find joy in the small things. But it wasn't enough. He still felt trapped. Trapped in the grief, trapped in the loneliness, trapped in the fear that he would never be the man he once was. And then one evening, everything changed. It was late, and the house was quiet, save for the soft sounds of Alice's breathing as she slept. Lucas sat on the couch staring out the window. The rain had begun to fall again, the rhythmic tapping of the droplets against the glass, a constant reminder of the storm raging inside of him. His mind raced with thoughts, his heart heavy with emotions he couldn't articulate. The silence was suffocating. The stillness in the room matched the stillness in his heart. He felt like he was sinking, drowning in his own sorrow. He had kept up the facade for so long, pretending to be fine, pretending to be okay. But tonight, he couldn't hold it in anymore. He reached for his phone, his fingers trembling as he unlocked it. There was only one name that had been lingering in his thoughts for the past few days: Clara. She had been kind to him, understanding in ways he hadn't expected. She hadn't pushed him to open up, hadn't asked questions he wasn't ready to answer. But tonight, Lucas couldn't keep pretending. He couldn't keep carrying this burden alone. With a shaky breath, he typed out a message. "Clara, can I see you? I need to talk. I don't know who else to turn to." He stared at the message for a long time, his thumb hovering over the send button. What was he doing? Was he really going to ask for help? Was he really going to admit that he couldn't do this on his own? But just as quickly as the doubt entered his mind, it was replaced with a surge of vulnerability. He needed her. He needed someone. And maybe, just maybe, Clara was the one who could help him find a way out of the darkness. With one final deep breath, Lucas hit send. It wasn't long before Clara's response came through. "Of course, Lucas, I'll be there in a few minutes." As soon as the message appeared on his screen, Lucas felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't much, but just knowing that Clara was willing to come, willing to be there for him, made him feel like he wasn't entirely alone. He didn't know what he was going to say or how he was going to say it, But at that moment, all that mattered was that he had taken the first step. When Clara arrived, it was as if the weight of the world had lifted slightly. She knocked gently on the door, and Lucas opened it to find her standing there, her presence calm and reassuring. She wasn't here to judge, to offer solutions, or to fix him. She was here because she understood. Without saying a word, Clara walked into the living room and took a seat beside him on the couch. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was comfortable, as if she was giving him the space he needed to find his words. She simply sat, her body language open, her eyes warm, showing him that she was there, ready to listen whenever he was ready to speak. Lucas sat there staring at his hands, unsure of where to begin. The words were tangled in his mind, the emotions swirling inside him too overwhelming to process. He had never been good at asking for help. He had always prided himself on being strong, on being the one who could handle anything life threw his way. But now, after everything that had happened, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. He wasn't sure if the man he once was could even come back. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready, Lucas," she said softly. "I'm not here to pressure you. But if you want to talk, I'm here to listen. I promise you. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself." Her words were simple, yet they hit Lucas like a tidal wave. He looked up at her, his eyes welling with tears. He hadn't realized how much he had been holding in until that moment. The pain, the fear, the loneliness. It all came rushing to the surface. "I don't know how to do this anymore, Clara," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to be anything. I feel like I'm falling apart, and I don't know if I can put myself back together." Clara's eyes softened, and she reached out to take his hand. "It's okay to feel like that," she said gently. "You don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to do it alone. You're not falling apart, Lucas. You're just broken right now. But broken things can be fixed, they can be healed." Lucas's chest tightened as he looked at her, feeling an overwhelming mix of gratitude and vulnerability. "But how?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do I fix this? How do I fix myself?" Clara didn't hesitate. "You take it one day at a time. You start by accepting that it's okay to not have it all figured out. You lean on the people who care about you, and most importantly, you forgive yourself. It's not going to happen overnight, Lucas, but I believe you can find your way." Tears began to spill from Lucas's eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't try to hold them back. The walls he had built around himself were crumbling piece by piece. He had spent so much time trying to protect himself from the pain, trying to hide it, that he had forgotten how to let someone in. But Clara was right. He didn't have to do it alone, and he didn't have to be perfect. In that moment, Lucas realized something that had been buried deep inside him for far too long. It was okay to ask for help. It was okay to lean on someone else when the weight of the world felt too heavy. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start rebuilding his life, one piece at a time. "I don't know if I can do this," Lucas whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "You don't have to do it all at once," Clara said softly. "But I'll be here, every step of the way." This moment marks a turning point for Lucas, where he finally allows himself to be vulnerable, accepting that he doesn't have to carry the weight of his grief alone. Clara's response is not just one of comfort, but of empowerment, showing him that healing is possible. Their connection deepens as they both begin to rebuild, one small step at a time. The weeks that followed Clara's visit were a blur of emotions for Lucas. Every day felt like a small step toward healing, even though there were moments when the weight of the past still pressed down on him, suffocating him. But with Clara by his side, offering support and understanding without expectation, Lucas found himself slowly coming back to life. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when he felt lost, when the grief threatened to pull him back into the darkness. But the light Clara brought into his life was undeniable. and with each passing day, Lucas found himself more willing to fight for the future he had once thought was beyond his reach. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table with Clara and Alice, the warmth of their laughter filling the air, Lucas realized something. He was no longer just surviving. He was living. For the first time in years, he felt the flicker of hope in his chest, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Rachel's death. Clara had become an integral part of their lives, not as a replacement for Rachel. No one could ever replace Rachel, but as someone who helped Lucas see that love was not a finite resource. Love didn't run out. It didn't disappear. It could be reborn, transformed, and it could heal even the deepest wounds. That evening, as the dinner dishes were cleared and Alice drifted off to sleep, Lucas found himself alone with Clara. The house was quiet, but the silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. There was a sense of peace, of mutual understanding, as they sat together, talking about everything and nothing. "Thank you for sticking around," Lucas said softly, his voice low with sincerity. "I don't think I would have made it this far without you." Clara turned to face him, her eyes warm and full of compassion. "You don't have to thank me, Lucas. I'm here because I want to be here. And I'm glad to see you starting to come back to life." Lucas smiled faintly, but there was a tinge of sadness in his eyes. "I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to get out of this darkness," he admitted. "I thought I was lost, that I'd never be the same again. I didn't know how to love anymore." Clara reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. "You're not lost, Lucas," she said softly. "You were just broken, and broken things can be fixed. It takes time, but love is the key. It's what pulls us out of the dark places. It's what gives us the strength to keep going." Lucas looked at her, his heart swelling with emotions he didn't know how to express. He had spent so long pushing people away, convincing himself that he was beyond saving. But Clara had shown him that it was possible to rebuild. She had given him the gift of her love, her support, and her patience, and it was a gift he didn't take for granted. "I don't know if I'll ever be the same person I was before," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe the person I'm becoming is just as worthy of love." Clara smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "The person you're becoming is a man who has fought through his pain and is finding his way back. And that's beautiful, Lucas. It's not about going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you're meant to be." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of her words settling over them both. Lucas felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in so long. Hope. Hope that he could build a future, not just for Alice, but for himself. A future filled with love, not just the kind of love that had been lost, but the kind of love that could be built from the ashes of his past. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas began to make small changes in his life. He started to open up more, to lean on Clara when the weight of the past felt too much to bear. He reached out to friends he hadn't spoken to in years, reconnecting with the people who cared about him, and most importantly, he began to see Alice in a new light. She wasn't just a reminder of Rachel. She was a part of him, a part of their love that had never died. One afternoon, as they sat in the park, watching Alice play, Lucas found himself smiling for the first time in a long time. He felt a sense of peace, a sense of contentment that had eluded him for years. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled him. It no longer defined him. Clara sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his. "You're doing great, Lucas," she said softly. "I'm so proud of how far you've come." Lucas glanced at her, his heart full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know where I'd be if you hadn't come into our lives." Clara smiled, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "You're stronger than you think, Lucas. You've always had the strength. You just needed someone to help you see it." In that moment, Lucas realized that Clara wasn't just helping him heal. She was showing him the true meaning of love. Love wasn't about perfection, about having everything figured out. Love was about understanding, about being there for each other even when things seemed impossible. It was about rebuilding together, piece by piece, and finding beauty in the brokenness. One evening, as Lucas tucked Alice into bed, he found himself standing in the doorway watching her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so content, and for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt a sense of peace wash over him as well. He had come a long way since the days of darkness and despair. He wasn't healed yet, but he was on the path. And that was enough. He had Clara by his side, and together they would build a future. A future filled with love, hope, and the promise that no matter what came their way, they would face it together. As he turned off the light and closed the door softly, Lucas whispered a silent promise to himself and to Alice. "We'll be okay. We'll always be okay." If this story touched you, pause for a moment. Who in your life deserves a fresh look? Share your story in the comments, like, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Because sometimes a desperate plea is the beginning of an eternal love.